Rwanda security forces received surrendering Congolese soldiers in Gisenya today, while humanitarian staff evacuated from Goma.
Now, M23 armed group claimed to have captured Goma, Congo's largest eastern city, as troops from both countries exchanged fire across the border.
Now, this follows an advance against the Congolese army.
9 South Africans are among the 13 soldiers killed in fierce fighting with the rebels.
The Rwanda-backed M23 rebels have quickly gained ground this month in the east of the DRC.
And the rebels had earlier ordered defending government forces to disarm and surrender, saying they were preparing to enter and take control.
Now, following negotiations, the rebels had allowed army officers to leave Goma by boat for Bukavu.
The conflict stems from long-standing regional tensions following Rwanda's 1994 genocide, with both countries accusing each other of supporting opposing armed groups. All right, let's take this further now. We speak to Dr. Jackie Cilliers, who is the board chair and head of African Futures and Innovation at the Institute for Security Studies, who is joining us to talk about this. Dr. Cilliers, thank you so much for your time. Good evening to you. Let's start with your reaction to the deaths of the soldiers of the SANDF.
Thanks. Good evening. Yes, I think we are all upset by what's happened. This is not the first time that South Africa has lost troops. We will remember the catastrophe with regard to the Battle of Bangui in the Central African Republic, and also losses elsewhere, such as in northern Mozambique. And the problem is very clearly that the SANDF, amongst others, is overstretched. We can talk about the mission in the eastern DRC specifically, because there are also issues there. But from everything we read, the SANDF forces don't have logistic, air and other support. Many of their vehicles and equipment are no longer serviceable, and they have an expansive offensive mandate. In other words, the Forces Intervention Brigade is empowered by the UN to drive M23 out of the area. They attacked apparently, and M23 counterattacked, and the South Africans, very much because they don't have the necessary support, equipment, ammunition, eventually were driven away, and M23 has taken Goma. So I think this is an old story of the SANDF, which is underfunded and poorly led, particularly from a political perspective, that has really, it has to support on-border security. It has to deploy in Mozambique. It has to deal with Zama-Zamas and on the border and everything else. It is completely overstretched and under-equipped, and doesn't have the means really for the deployments that are being authorized without a clear understanding of the logistics to support them.
And I want to probe further on this issue of them being overstretched just a little later on in our conversation. Let's just look at some of the reports that are suggesting right now that we may see some reinforcements, especially when you're seeing reports that are suggesting that, you know, the M23 are saying that they've taken over Goma. And one wonders then, if they do get this reinforcement, can they be a better match?
Well, perhaps in the short term, but the problem essentially is that we can't support our forces from South Africa. We don't have the aircraft and the ammunition and other stocks in area. And the Rooivalk helicopters and other support equipment are no longer serviceable. So we're now speaking of deployment of additional forces that is really scraping the bottom of the barrel, given, I don't mean that in a negative sense, I mean in terms of the ability of forces, because of the deployment in Mozambique. And South Africa doesn't have the means anymore to deploy and support eastern DRC and northern Mozambique. And I think some tough decisions have to be made, not only with regard to our support there, but also generally just about the funding environment that the SANDF finds itself in. These things are extremely expensive. When the president agreed to extend the mandate of our forces in Mozambique in the middle of last year, that deployment alone, according to the SANDF, would cost almost R1 trillion. That is a lot of money.
And
sorry, $1 billion. My apologies, $1 billion.
When you then look at that, right, Dr. Cilliers, because we've seen in the last defense review, for example, if I can take that, and they do talk about this issue of budget and the constraints. But at the same time, when you read it, you then get a sense that there is a choice that the country may need to make here, which is increase the budget or scale back on some of the ambitions. Are we able to do any of the two? And if we pick, which one would it be in your view?
Well, the defense budget has been under pressure for a long time. The first decision we need to take is to accept that it is unlikely that the defense budget can increase substantially. We know South Africa doesn't have any money. So the Department of Defense, we have to scale back our ambition and embark really on hard choices and train and equip and provide the SANDF with the means to do what we tell them, what they are employed to do, not what for defense against conventional attack and all of the kind of traditional roles of the military. But with a defense budget at the level that it is at the moment, we really have to scale down on a very top-heavy structure and look at what do we really want the SANDF to perform. And those are peacekeeping missions, support to the police internally, border security, and then train and equip our military for those roles. And stop trying to provide forces that are theoretically orientated towards conventional defense, which is what is the mainstay still from the defense reviews that have been done over the years.
And when you listen to some of those who are watching what is currently taking place in the Eastern DRC, they talk about a possible diplomatic solution as one that could assist when it comes to ending that particular conflict. Others are saying it may be too late for that. Which side are you leaning towards?
There is no doubt that now is the time for senior leadership engagement. Now, that has happened on a number of occasions. President Ramaphosa and President Paul Kagame have met, and as well as with President Tshisekedi of the DRC. The reality is that SADC is involved in a proxy war with Rwanda in the Eastern DRC. And there are all kinds of other issues with regard to regional relations with Burundi and Uganda in the region, lack of support from the local population, both for the SADC forces as well as the armed forces of the DRC. But at this point, I think, and South Africa has said this at the UN Security Council over the weekend, it is important that foreign forces withdraw from the Eastern DRC. We have a situation where it's very evident, and 6 reports from the United Nations have indicated that M23 is being actively supported by the Rwandan military. There needs to be a political solution to a situation that we all concerned could really result in all-out war between the DRC and Rwanda. Remember that Kabila Sina, the president of the former president of Kabila of the DRC, was installed in Kinshasa by Rwanda. Rwanda advanced across the DRC and eventually installed him as president. So Rwanda has and that was then SADC then eventually with the second invasion fought against the Rwanda. So there's a long-standing challenge between SADC and Rwanda, and this issue can only be resolved at a political level.
And
so it's complicated.
Yeah, we've seen Rwanda coming out to say that they're not responsible for this. But in your view, why do you think that the fingers continue to point towards their direction, in spite of the fact that they still continue to say that they're not responsible when it comes to what we're seeing there as far as the M23 rebels are concerned?
So the UN have a panel of experts. They have brought out 6 reports that have clearly pointed the finger at Rwanda. And the M23 is deploying anti-aircraft systems. They've got new equipment, sophisticated communications and other equipment. Where does this come from? It can only come from Rwanda. I think it's clear as daylight. And that does mean that what we need a diplomatic solution. Of course, Rwanda argues that it's there to defend itself against the FDLR. The previous genocidaires that fled after the genocide in Rwanda fled into the eastern DRC. But in subsequent years, it's very evident that Rwanda has also developed commercial and other interests. And because the government in Kinshasa does not control the territory in the eastern DRC, the economy of the eastern DRC is intimately linked with that of Rwanda. And there is that linkage is very tight. If you look at Rwandan exports of, for example, critical minerals and gold, then the analysis points to the fact that a large majority of that actually comes from the eastern DRC. And we have to confront this issue. We've tried diplomatically South Africa and the DR Congo, but it really has the potential to blow up. So I think it's time that the leadership, South Africa, President Ramaphosa, engage with President Kagame and try and find a way of stopping this this proxy war, which really can provide a real problem. Remember that next door in Mozambique, SADC is ostensibly deployed in parallel with Rwanda in defense, against the insurgents, but Rwandese are there basically to defend the Total oil and gas facility, and they are funded apparently by the French to do that. It's a very complicated game that's being played out in the eastern DRC.
And certainly one that may have serious implications and continue to do so for the region. But thank you so much, Dr. Cilliers, for your time. I appreciate it. And as you say, there's a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack when it comes to this conversation. That was Dr. Jackie Cilliers there, who is the board chair and head of African Futures and Innovation at the Institute for Security Studies.